Good morning, broadcasters. 360 seconds news and commentary for broadcast professionals is on the air. I'm Maria Koladova from TKT. Let's discuss the latest technological news with our respected experts, Philip Grossman and Mary Seidler. Don't forget to give the program a like. So we were originally meant to do a year in review show, but before that, there's some big news in the audio world as broadcaster Odyssey files for bankruptcy. So Mary, can you take us through that?
So this is it's sad news. I don't think there's anyone in radio who would say otherwise. Odyssey was originally CBS radio, and those of us who grew up, I was a radio broadcaster, I was a radio journalist, and CBS news, radio news just was iconic and still is. So what this really means, it'll be interesting how this plays out. One of the things that Odyssey has been doing to cut costs is they've been getting rid of some of their really high-end, expensive real estate and moving into smaller facilities. Now, when you've got a monster player like Odyssey making this move, it's definitely going to have an effect on the rest of radio. And I was thinking this morning, is the era of the big radio consoles, is that coming to an end? And this ties in with what we're going to talk about a little later with remote production, because as broadcasters like Odyssey move into these smaller studios, they're finding, well, we're going to have to do more with less, and we're probably not going to be able to afford the big consoles. So it'll be interesting to see how that shifts. I've been preaching for a long time to radio broadcasters of cheap and cheerful. And that's in a way, that's where we came from. Look, in the 1980s, we didn't have a lot of money, radio stations in smaller markets, to spend on equipment. And I think we're probably going back a little bit to those roots.
Do you think, Mary, that this is going to change? I mean, I think, if I'm not mistaken, over the last 10 years, 15 years, in just about all industries, we have a certain level of consolidation. And radio really had a lot of consolidation. Do you think this will sort of, I don't know if end consolidation is the right word, but because you're not going into large single locations with giant studios, you're going into
Yeah.
smaller control rooms. Do you think we'll see sort of more localized programming develop out of this market?
Oh boy, I hope so. I really hope so, because the smaller market stations, for example, I was in Maine a few months ago, and there's a station near Harrington, Maine, that it's all live and local. And you know what? Everyone in that town listens to that station because you're getting something very current. So those are the stations that are still working. And yeah, this may be that they spin off some of these stations, and it could be individual owners who are willing to take a chance, just like we saw in the 1970s and 80s, are willing to do that. I don't think another big group like EMF, I'm not sure they would be interested in buying any of the Odyssey stations, because they probably have stations in their markets.
Okay. All right, so why don't we switch gears and talk a little bit about what I think was one of the big things of this past year was remote production, and how that's impacting our industry. So, Mary, how does it, from an audio perspective? I mean, audio is obviously easier when it comes to the tech and the distribution. Do we see a lot more remote production on the audio side?
We really saw this speed up during the pandemic. The whole thing with remote production, for many years, we've had audio codecs that work, and you get a fairly decent audio feed when you're doing remote. So it makes it easier. Again, this move away from these big consoles. Yeah, I think in radio, you'll start to see it's easier to do remote production. Not so much that they're out doing the traditional remotes, but they're probably doing it from much smaller facilities than we've ever imagined before. How about in video?
Yeah, I think on the broadcast side, like everything else, the pandemic sped everything up, which I don't think we're quite 100. Prior to it, that was sort of the holy grail, remote productions. I mean, organizations were tired of spending millions of dollars on these production trucks and having them on the highway, and trying to find a better way to do that. I think they learned a lot during the pandemic, in terms of what infrastructure is available, what infrastructure needs to be there. I think it was a great learning experience for a lot of organizations, really trying to figure out how to do it. And I think it has sped up the industry and maybe given it a better vector to focus on and how to go about doing this. Because video is, I mean, it's hard to do remotely because of latency and round tripping, and some things have to be local to the facility and some things can be in the cloud, and all those things together have sort of impacted how we've done it in the past, and they learn very, very quickly how to do it. You know, and it's one of those things where they say, learn from others' mistakes because you'll never live long enough to make them all yourself. And I think hopefully as an industry, we've learned from our mistakes, trials, and tribulations, but it's helped us, I think, get a better foothold on what we can do in the future. And I think it's going to enable our industry to do a lot more remote productions. You'll get more live specials, concerts and sporting events. And, you know, the sporting market in and of itself is Bally. So we're all living through that.
All right, well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much to Philip and Mary, and don't forget to comment on the news that we've discussed. See you next Monday at the same time. Goodbye.
Bye.